The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
I call it learning to read. Okay? Isaac and Sam were walking along this dusty road. They had been walking for hours and hours. This was in the late 1800s. Isaac and Sam were black men. They had been slaves, but the slaves had just been freed. They were freed from this plantation where they had lived their whole lives, and they didn't quite know what to do. They had been told what to do. They had no freedom, but they knew they had to get away and find some help. Isaac was only about 19 years old. Sam, he thinks, was around 40-ish. He never knew what his birthday was. But he had kind of taken Isaac under his wing to help Isaac live through those terrible teenage years when Isaac would try to complain about something. His back was covered with scars. And Sam had helped him out. But as they walked along, he said, "Where are we going? What'll we do?" And Isaac said, "I know if we just keep going. I hear there's a church in a little town nearby in Georgetown. We can find that church. There's someone there that will help us." And they walked and walked and walked, and they got into the town, and they finally asked someone, and they said, "Oh, I think it's down that street, way down the hill there." And they walked down, and they saw this kind of poorly shaped shack building, old wooden building that was being kind of destroyed. But in front there were two sticks held together to make a cross, and they said, "This must be it." And there were people out in the yard around this building, and some of them were just sort of sitting, some of them looked as if they were cooking something under a little fire or walking around. And they said, "Well, what do we do there?" And someone said, "Well, you got to go in there and see Miss Sandy." And they walked up to the front steps and started to go up, and the door opened, and one of the largest, strongest looking women in the world, a black woman, was there saying, "You boys coming in here?" And they said, yes, we'd like to come here. And she said, "I'm Miss Sandy." "Yes, we know. And she said, "You can come here, but you got to do just what I say." And they said, "Okay." She said, "You got to learn to read." They said, "Read? We're not allowed to read." She said, "You're free. You're allowed to read now. You've got to learn." So they went in, and she sat them down. It was one of the pews of this old church. Now, Miss Sandy didn't have any equipment for teaching school. She didn't have pencils or pens or paper or anything else, blackboards. She had pieces of charcoal and flat piece of wood, maybe. And she didn't have any books, but there were Bibles in there. So her technique was she'd pull out some pages from the Bible and pick out maybe a sentence or 3 or 4 words, like "Jesus loves me" or something you'd find in any Bible. And she had them copy those letters over and over, which sounds kind of strange, but she wanted them to understand that those little marks on the paper translated into words, and the words translated into meanings. They had no real concept of that. So they worked on that for several days, for quite a while. They moved up to learning about the whole alphabet a little bit, and one day Sam burst out of that place and outside and said, "Miss Sandy, look what I can do." And he took a stick, and down in the sand and in this dried up earth in front of him, he wrote S-A-M. "I can write my name." Well, Isaac came along and put his down. He said, "My name's twice as long as yours. I must be twice as smart." Well, they stayed, and Miss Sandy worked with them more. She says, you're going to be going sooner and you're going to find a job. And you gotta be able to write your name. You gotta know where you go when you see the funny thing we call an arrow. You know, you go this way. You may know that now, but I'm sure you know. And you got to also, you can't just say I was a slave. You each have lots of skills. You've been working on those rice farms your whole lives. You know how to grow rice. You know how to take care of animals. You know how to fix things that are broken. You got to tell them everything you can do, so they'll hire you. And she encouraged them, and finally the day came when she said, it's time for you to go. She would kind of have liked to have them stick around because they were kind of good to have there, but she needed the space for other people because people kept coming. So they said goodbye and they left. And Miss Sandy kept going with her work for a long, long time. Once in a while she wondered how they were doing, all these people that went off and left from her place, if they did all right. And then one day, a person who was traveling by foot came along and said, I'm looking for a Miss Sandy. He looked in his travel bag and read it again. He said, yep, I got a letter for her. And I'm just going through this town. And I thought this is where they said I'd find her. And they showed him in to see Miss Sandy. And he said, I got a letter for you. He said, a letter? I never had a letter. And she opened it up, opened the top of the envelope, pulled out, it was a folded up piece of paper, looked like it might have been ripped from a book or a notebook or something. And she unfolded it, and there were 2 $1 bills. And on that paper, it said, thank you, Isaac and Sam. Well, she was so thrilled, and everyone said, well, they didn't tell where they are or how they're doing. And she said, just look at this. We know how they're doing. You know, in these days, sometimes you have to work a whole week to make $1. And you have to work hard. And they've got enough money to send us $2. They have really learned to read. That's Miss Sally's
story I call Gorilla Glue. And this is a story about when I was in a play. I was in Arsenic and Old Lace, and I was playing the part of Aunt Martha. And if you're ever involved in a smaller production of community theater, you'll find that the actors don't just act. We might make our own costumes. We bring in furniture from our homes for set decoration. And that was the case for this play. So at dress rehearsal, a chair that I had brought in from my home was damaged a bit during kind of a raucous scene. So the next day, opening night, I brought in some Gorilla Glue to fix the chair. Now, I'd never used Gorilla Glue before, but it said on the bottle that it would fix just about anything, so I trusted that. A couple hours before opening, I went onto the stage and I squirted the glue into the hole in the chair and I shoved the support into it, and of course glue ran down the side of the leg. And I wiped it away with my hand. Chair fixed, I rubbed my hands together, spreading glue all over both my hands. Those of you who are gasping, you've used Gorilla Glue before, and you know that that was a drastic mistake on my part, but I thought it worked just like Elmer's glue, and I would just wash it off or peel it off, no big deal. So I went into the bathroom, and hot water and soap, and I washed my hands, and it felt like the glue was off, and I took a paper towel to dry them, and sure enough, I had little bits of paper towel stuck all over both of my hands. So I washed them again with as hot of water as I could stand, washed them. Took the paper towel, no, still had little pieces of paper towel stuck all over my hands. Our production was in a high school, so I decided to seek out the janitor. When I found him, he gave me a bottle of very strong cleaning solution. He sprayed it on my hands for me, and I rubbed them together, and the paper towel went away, but once my hand dried, they were just as sticky as before. Next, we tried paint thinner.
Ooh.
He rubbed paint thinner on both of my hands. Rubbed them together, they felt nice and smooth. Once they dried, they were sticky again. So no matter what liquid you put on my hands, once it dried, they were sticky again. I was starting to panic. I was going to go on stage in a little over an hour. I had numerous props to handle, and I wouldn't be able to put any of them down. Then I had the epiphany that I could call the 800 number on the Gorilla Glue bottle. Of course, I couldn't pick up the phone because you know what would have happened. So my friend dialed the number for me and put the phone on speaker. And we waited with bated breath. I didn't expect to speak to anyone because it was Saturday. But as we listened to the options on their menu, and when it came to option 5, and it said, if you have Gorilla Glue on your skin and cannot remove it, press option 5. I was very excited. I thought, this is it. This is the answer that I need. I will be able to go on stage and not carry around a wine bottle, a tray, utensils, dishes, my hand, my purse, and a bottle of poison. We listened with bated breath. And the automated voice went on to say, if you have Gorilla Glue on your hands, do not try to remove it with harsh solvents. That will only irritate your skin. The glue will wear off in time. It will usually take about a week. A week? Fortunately, the voice went on to say that hand lotion applied liberally will help to dissipate some of the stickiness. Gobs of hand lotion later, I went on stage. The stickiness was gone, but I had a new problem, not to let the wine bottle slip out of my hands. Arsenic and old lace, Aunt Martha, a role that will always stick with me.
I think I will tell the story of the $100 bill. It's from a story written by a storyteller called Fran Stallings.
Yes.
Quite some time ago, and I saw it in a magazine once, and I don't know why, but I just love this story. Okay. Mr. McCabe owned one of the largest farms, ranches in the Southwest. He was doing very, very well. He was making a lot of money. He was hiring a lot of people. He was a good man who helped the community out. His only problem was finding enough workers, because ranch hands would show up and they might stay a week and they might stay a month and work, and then they'd go on because they wanted to go somewhere else. They wanted to go to California or go north or take off. They'd get on their horses and ride away, and he'd have to find someone else, or else he'd hire someone who stayed who wasn't any good. So that was his problem, and he kept trying to figure out what to do. And one day there was a knock on his door, and there was this man who said, my name's Charlie, and I hear you're looking for helpers. And he said, well, yes, I am, Charlie, but come on in and let's talk about that. Well, he asked Charlie a lot of questions, and Charlie seemed to know how to answer them all, and he seemed okay, and he looked fine. And so Mr. McCabe said, well, he wasn't naive, though, you know, he liked this guy, but he'd only met him. He said, Charlie, let's you and I work out a deal. I'll hire you for like a month. So this is early in the month. I'll hire you till the end of the month, and if I like you, we'll keep you here. And if you like me, you can stay here, or you're free to go. Well, that month was just like heaven for Mr. McCabe, because Charlie turned out to be the greatest worker ever. He knew how to do everything. He knew how to take care of the animals. He knew how to fix the fences when they were down. He knew how to repair any of the equipment that was there. And most of all, he knew how to get along with the other workers. And they liked working with him. And they accomplished more when Charlie was around and trying to help them out. So at the end of the month, Mr. McCabe said, Charlie, you are hired. I hope you stay forever and ever. And they worked out some kind of a deal. Charlie loved being there. It was fine. everything was going well. But then they had a year with a drought, and everything was drying up. And there was no hope that it was going to end very soon. So Mr. McCabe called Charlie in and said, we got to sell this cattle soon. I know we usually wait till they're older and heavier and everything else, but we can't even feed them anymore. I want you to take some men with you and take that herd of cattle into town and sell them at the auction. You won't get much money for them, but see what you can do. I know it's a hard job, but I know you can do it, Charlie. Charlie said, fine, you can do it. And he got 3 of his best workers. They all got on their horses, and they got the cattle out, and they spent 2 days getting this herd of cattle from the ranch down to the auctioneers. And it was very tiresome. They slept out in their sleeping bags the first night and made sure none of the cattle ran away or anything happened to them. And by the end of the second day, when Charlie had made the deal to sell these things, they were all ready to just do something fun. And they went. They went to Miss Martha's house. It was like a boarding house, sort of, but she had a little bar in there, and she had rooms for rent, and all of this stuff, and they had a wonderful time. They had a wonderful meal. They had dancing. Some girls showed up. So they had dancing and music and singing and lots and lots and lots of beer. So the next morning, there was Miss Martha staring in at this room. Charlie came by and said, Charlie, look at that. That mirror's broken. That chair, the leg is off it, I think, now. And this place stinks. Somebody must have spilled every drop of their beer all over the place. And I got to do a lot of cleaning up. Charlie said, oh, I know, I'm sorry, but the guys had worked so hard, and they did get a little out of hand. I'll see that doesn't happen again. And he reached in his pocket and he said, but here, maybe this will help you. And he handed her $100 bill. And she said, oh, Charlie, that will save me. I haven't had much business with this drought. Thank you so much. Charlie said, you're welcome. And he took the men and they left and went home. Miss Martha ran next door to the grocery store. It was like the general store, but that's where she ordered all her groceries. And she gave the man there that $100 bill because she owed him so much. She had to order and get food and things she needed and charge him, and she didn't like doing that, so she gave him the $100 bill, and he didn't keep it for long because he took it right down the street to the undertaker. And he said, Mr. Parsons, last summer when my uncle died, you gave him the best funeral I've ever seen. You did everything you needed, and we didn't have enough money to pay you, so I'm paying you now. And he gave him the $100 bill. Well, it went one more place. It went down to the livery stable where the owner there took care of the animals that Mr. Parsons had and everything else, and he got the $100 bill because they were behind in that. And guess where he took it? He took it to Mr. McCabe. He had bought all his food for his horses from Mr. McCabe, from his big ranch. So Charlie and the boys got home. Everybody was happy. Mr. McCabe was thrilled. He said, Charlie, I don't know how you did it. You got a better price than I ever would have expected. Oh, I just love having you work here, Charlie, but I got one big favor now to ask of you. It's supposed to finally rain, and maybe thunder and lightning, and out there in the back pasture we got all those new little foals, those little horses, and I'm afraid some of them might get nervous with us. I'd like to have somebody out there tonight to make sure they're all right. Would you mind spending the night out there? Well, of course not, said Charlie. And he got ready. He took his blanket and he rolled up to sleeping outside like that, and he got some food and everything else, and he rode his horse out there, tied up the horse, got a fire started, putting his stew in there, stew in the pan pot so he could heat it up. And then he sat down. It was just about dusk by now, and he's looking around, and it's nice. The sun was just setting, and it was a beautiful time, and the horses seemed calm, and there was no lightning or thunder again. And Charlie's sitting there, and all of a sudden he starts to smile and kind of laugh. And he reached in his pocket. And you see, Mr. McCabe had given him a $100 bill for the hard work he did with getting those horses there. Charlie pulled that out of his pocket. And you know what he did? He put that right in the fire. And he sat there and watched the black pieces of charred money were raised up and blown away. And Charlie kept smiling. And he said, finally, that bill went a long way today, and nobody even noticed it was counterfeit.
Well, I call this story the African Violet Caper. And it is actually a story about one of the most terrifying things that I ever did in my life. And at that time, I was working at a bank as the payroll clerk, and my office was adjacent to that of the internal auditor. And I will call him John because that was his name. And John was a bit of a whiner, and he liked to come into my office every day and whine and complain. And I could tolerate it up to a point because I do have a high pain tolerance. But it was his remarks about women that really got to me. He would say things like, women should be barefoot and pregnant, and women were put on this earth to serve man. I suspected that at home his wife ruled the roost, and so he liked to puff himself up at work. And I would sometimes come back with a snarky comment, but that would just egg him on, so eventually I just quit, and I would listen. On Employee Appreciation Day, every person in the bank was given an African violet. Now, John doted on his African violet. And every day when he came into my office, he would tell me how well he was taking care of it with appropriate watering and fertilizer. And as he went on and on and on about his excellent green thumb, this idea formulated in my head. And I decided to kidnap his African violet and hold it hostage, which found me standing on top of the tallest metal file cabinet in my office at 6:30 a.m. one morning. My heart was pounding like a jackhammer, and my jello-like legs were jittering and jiggling. So I just paused for a moment to gather my breath, and I looked out over this elite floor of the bank and noticed how quiet it was. Without all of the executives, the ego cloud had dissipated. And then I noticed that it sort of looked like a maze. And I imagined all of the executives, the vice president of human resources, and the vice president of finance, and the vice president of accounting, all of those executives as superior rats, directing all of us worker rats in our daily activities. The secretary and I were the only worker rats on the floor. And then I composed myself, realizing, I better get to it because I only had just so much time to do this. And if I got caught, I would be fired. So I stepped over on top of the tall metal cabinet in John's office, and I almost slid right off. I chastised myself for wearing pantyhose. But it was too late to do anything about it because anyone who wears control top pantyhose knows that it takes an inordinate amount of time to take them off and put them back on. So I just vowed to be careful. I had been in John's office before, so I knew that his furniture was situated in a way that I could clamber my way down, which I did. And when I arrived on his office floor, I scooped up his plant and I put it on top of the file cabinet and I climbed my way back up and then I put it over on top of my cabinet and climbed over very carefully and cautiously made my way down till I was in the solid carpeted floor of my office. And I breathed a sigh of relief. Once my pulse settled down, I looked around trying to figure out where I was going to put that African violet. I threw caution to the wind and put it on the windowsill next to mine. Now the ransom note. I had prepared for this by occasionally getting a brand new interoffice envelope from the mailroom because I couldn't use one from my office, even if I tried to black out my name. You never know. John was good at discovery. And as for the ransom note, I prepared a true kidnapper's ransom note. At home, I cut out little words out of magazines and glued them all over a piece of paper. I made sure I did this at home because otherwise I would be misappropriating company supplies. So the first ransom note said, "I have your African violet. If you want to get it back alive, do as I say. More to follow." So I put the ransom note in the envelope, and I wrote John's name with my left hand to describe my signature. And John would be in soon, so I locked my office door. I went next door for coffee, but I shoved the envelope, I buried it in the secretary's inbox. When I came back at 8:30, the floor was in bedlam. John was scurrying about trying to sniff out his plant and who had sent the note. As soon as he saw me get off the elevator, he ran over and told me what had happened, and I feigned surprise. He followed me to my office, babbling, whining. I tried not to make eye contact. I took off my coat, I hung it up, I sat with my back to him. I was afraid I would burst out laughing. So I shuffled through papers, and eventually he got tired of complaining and he left. I closed my office door and I put my head down on my desk and I enjoyed a delicious silent laugh. The next day I sent the next ransom note, prepared very much the same way as the first one. And this one said, "I have your precious African violet. If you wish to get it back, you must wear a pink shirt to work." Now, in those days, men didn't wear pink shirts. "You will begin each day in the common area with a 10-minute speech as to the superiority of women. Every day without compliance," and I thought the word compliance was good for an internal auditor, "would result in a severed appendage of your plant." So I put the note in the envelope and I put one of the leaves from his plant in there with it. I waited till everyone left that day, and then I buried the envelope in the in basket for the secretary, or the out basket. Of course, the next morning when I came in, John came right into my office. He was incensed. He would not comply with these demands. This is ridiculous. As he went on and on and on about how ridiculous this whole situation was, he had a clear sight line to his plant sitting on my windowsill, and he was so busy with pontification, he never noticed it. Of course, I played like I was very sympathetic to John. I think I got the Academy Award for that role. And eventually he left. And after a couple of days of him not complying and me mutilating the plant, I just stopped because the fun was over. I never got the result that I wanted, but when I resigned from the bank, I left with 2 African violets.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning